Just imagine you join a band at 16 years of age, and at 20, you leave that band. Now you spend the rest of your life having to focus on those 4 years of your life because that band was so damn big that everyone wanted to talk about it. I mean, he's had a further career, but for Glen Matlock, who was bassist of the Sex Pistols, really a lot of his life has focused on those 4 years. Now, in this interview, he talks extensively about his time in the Sex Pistols and, of course, what he's doing today.
And he said, "You seen that?" And I said, "Well, I have." He said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, have you seen that? What do you think?" And he went, "Well, kind of rock follies, isn't it, really?" He always wanted Sid in the band, which is a bit of a bone of contention. And that's what he got. Being cooped up together, it didn't really help. Well, I'm a diamond dealer, aren't I? On the wall was sort of repeated, "Vive l'Anarchy," right? You know, anarchy. And he looked at me and he went, oh. I always say that I don't think it would have happened if everybody hadn't played their part.
Now, before that interview with Glen Matlock starts, just time for me to ask you to please take out a membership. Level 2 membership, the price of a coffee, will allow you to see each new interview earlier than non-members, and it really supports me in making this podcast. So here he is, Glen Matlock. So Glen Matlock, welcome. I mean, I've obviously been listening to Consequences Coming, which was your album that came out last year, and also read your autobiography, Triggers a Life in Music. One thing you mentioned in the book that I found that really, well, I suppose it's really a lot about artists, but it's about everything. And that is that you carry your childhood with you. And I think you mentioned it a little bit about John, but it was clearly about, you know, you as well. So let's maybe talk about some significant events in your childhood musically.
Oh,
you talked about a Kinks song, Dead End Street.
It was probably my first kind of run-in with social commentary and music that I kind of understood. It resonated with the way I was brought up. I mean, you know, I never went hungry and all that, and I had kind of quite a supportive family, but we was living in a 2 up, 2 down on the top floor only with a 10 bath, you know, once in a blue moon, maybe not the rent collector, but the insurance collector would come round. And in fact, I remember it was Mr. Seagraves, and sometimes it would be like, we're not in, right? You know, there was that kind of thing going on. And then there was all that talk in the 60s. You pick up the kids, you know, of the £10 pom, you know, and emigrating. And it kind of, I mean, in a way, it sounded quite exciting. And I'm going to tell you a funny little story. I know somebody who's married to a mate who became a big record producer. And his missus, when she was a kid, their family went all the way to Australia to be £10 poms. They got there. It must have taken 2 months to sail to Australia. Got there, her mum decided she didn't like it, and they came all the way back again. Now we reckon that maybe her mum was having a fling with the captain or something.
There must have been something else there. What I loved about that Kinks song wasn't just a track, but also there was a short film. I mean, what with, you know, a video, but it was a short film in that period.
Well, yeah, the Undertakers. I've only seen that in retrospect. I think it was actually banned, but, you know, and I used to watch pretty religiously when I could. It was Ready, Steady, Go, you know. I don't remember having seen that at the time.
I mean, you said there weren't like hardships in your home, but in a sense, there was when your father lost his job. And
yeah, I do remember him coming home from work one day with a bit of a long look on his face, and maybe I was about 11 or something, but I don't know. And I said, "What's up with you?" And he said, "Well, we've had a vote at work, and all the guys have voted me to be shop steward." I said, "That was great. They must all like you, you know." And Daddy said, "No, it's trouble. You watch." And about a month later, there was, you know, and this is in the 60s with Wilson and all that lark. And there was a sort of a strike, but it wasn't a strike. There was a lockout, which is there's a difference, right? When the company locks the workers out, and he tried to sign on, and they wouldn't let him get in any money because he was on strike, but he wasn't actually on strike. So there was all conversation zones about the difference between strikes and lockouts and blah, 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 blah. And we were struggling a little bit, but then there was compulsory redundancies made, and they sacked all the shop stewards first, right? And he didn't want to be the shop steward, and it just kind of it was the seeds in my mind of life's not fair, in the world of business and working and stuff. Kind of quite how that filtered into me as a man, I don't know, but it must have had some kind of effect.
Well, I think when you're young, you have these sensitivities, and it's really weird because I looked after my mum at the last part of her life, and she told me my dad didn't want a third child, and I was the third child, and he had not a lot to do with me. And I think that impacted me immensely because I felt I didn't have love from him, and I tried to compensate it later by being on TV, which is ludicrous. But, and I just wondered if in a sense, that was the formation of your drive.
Maybe. I think the other thing, I didn't have any brothers or sisters, so, well, kind of lonely, but, you play football in the street with your mates, and then mums would come out, your dinner's ready, and they'd all go home with their brothers or their sisters, and I go home by myself. And when you got a guitar, you got some company. When you listen to records, you got some company, kind of thing. And then, later on, maybe when I was 16 or something, I sort of came upon a bass guitar. Someone at school was selling it, and you get it home, you got a bass guitar, and you start to try and play it. You can't hear it because you haven't got an amplifier, but playing bass by yourself, let's put this politely, is the sound of one hand clapping, and you soon realise you need to play with some other people to make it a worthwhile experience. And in kind of short order, through getting a job at Malcolm McLaren's teddy bear shop down the King's Road later on, I met Stephen Paul, who fortuitously was struggling with their bass player. They had a bass player, but he never turned up. In fact, it was Paul's sister's fiance, Del.
Was music an escape from your reality, or was it an extension of your reality?
Oh, never really thought that. Probably a little bit of both, to be honest. I think when you were saying that, I was just thinking, and I think I've always rooted for the underdog for some reason. Perhaps because I felt I was a bit of an underdog myself. I don't know, really. I never felt I was a loser, but it's kind of, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's all right. I mean, one of the things I'm proud of, I think, through the punk thing, people sort of kind of think you're layabouts and you're rock music. If people knew what blinking hard work it is, like, it's not the hour. In fact, I bumped into Nick Lowe a few years back down in Portobello Road, and I said, "Oh, Nick, you're going on tour soon, aren't you?" And he said, "Well, I'm not sure." I said, "Well, it's advertised." He said, "Yeah, you know what, Glenn, though? He's a little bit older than me." He said, "When you're our age, it's not the hour you spend on stage, it's the 23 hours you spend getting there." And it's kind of true. And I kind of dig that. And, there's degrees of comfort of flying in the front of a plane to go to Australia, which I did with Blondie earlier this year. Or then sitting in the back of the van, in a splitter van with all the equipment, in the piss and rain in November. There's degrees of it. Where am I going with this?
I don't know, but I was going to ask you about your parents, because I wondered how they took to you taking music seriously and moving into that area when, if I remember, my father was a market trader, and I was told by my mum that you had to get a stable job in life. It was our generation. It was like this.
Well, you're talking about a barrow boy or in the stocks and shares?
No, a barrow
Market
boy.
trader.
A barrow boy. No, stock market trader. No, a barrow boy. And but their whole thing was about, that you just need to have some stability. You need to have a stable job, and having a creative life was never considered stability. So if you're pursuing something creative like you were at that point, I'm sure your parents weren't necessarily fully behind it.
Well, I mean, I was lucky enough to get into art college, and but some of my, I went to a pretty reasonable school. I went to a grammar school that had delusion of grandeur, but in my year, there was 3 or 4 people who went to Oxford, Cambridge or Oxford. I think my parents kind of hoped that I was doing something like that, to do something like that, but I wasn't particularly academic, but I just kept my head down and made sure you didn't get detention for not doing your physics homework. Ended up doing all the subjects I didn't want to do. Somehow managed to get into art college. So I think they was a bit disappointed about that. And then I flunked out of art college after getting into the degree in fine art painting, which I'm proud of, but didn't go because in the summer holidays I decided to join the Sex Pistols to take it seriously. I don't think they were too happy about that. But they were supportive, The only problem was we did that Bill Grundy show thing, and my mum was working part time at the gas board. And when she went into work next day, all the girls cooked, and she only did it for some pin money and to get out of the house. I mean, not that I was a bit more comfortable by then, and have a laugh with the girls. And they started calling her Mr. Sex Pistol. That didn't go down well. She took it out of my dad, he took it out of me, and we didn't speak for a year. There's a knock on effect to all these things.
Another band that you really liked during your childhood was the Faces, or the Small Faces.
Yeah.
And you'd listen to an album and it had the track Bad and Ruin on it.
Yeah.
And this was the track that got you interested in the guitar, wasn't it?
Well, not the guitar so much, just playing in general. But if you listen to the lyrics of the song, it resonated. It was probably the first Faces song I'd ever had, because I was hip to the Small Faces. I didn't realise the Faces were like a continuation of the Small Faces when I bought the record. I soon found out. But this was a long time before Stay With Me was a hit. It's their second album. But Bad and Ruin, it's like almost like a kind of Stax Memphis Soul kind of groove kind of thing, all on one chord, which isn't very good when you're learning chords on the guitar and you're trying to play along and it's the same all the way through. Then you think like the fiddly bits are a bit too much for you, But the lyrics are, Mama, you won't recognise me now. And it's about somebody going away. I think Rod Stewart's probably gone and toured Europe busking or something like that. And he comes back with his tail between his legs because it hasn't quite worked out, but he's a changed man, So that sort of had something to do with it slightly. I mean, it's hardly Anarchy in the UK, but it's not, will you dance with me, darling, either. I'm not saying that to you, I'm saying generally.
Yeah, you don't know my answer. That's the thing.
Oh, right. Let's move swiftly on.
Yeah, let's move swiftly on. You mentioned grammar school. I went to a grammar school, same thing, science-based grammar school, which didn't interest me at all. Maths, physics, and chemistry, I think I studied. But I discovered later in life, as a writer, that mathematics really helped me have some sort of logical through road to writing. And I just wondered whether actually, when you look back, there was part of that was useful.
Well, maybe when like home recording came out, which every musician of my age has got, you might have a studio at home, but you've got a computer with music software on it. Especially when you're programming drums and things like that, time signatures and quantization for swing beats, and I suppose like there's a bar, a normal bar's got 4 beats in it, and there's all subdivisions of you get half a beat, which there's sort of 2 beats in it, and you can subdivide that into quavers, quartets, quavers, and you can take it right down to thousands, and they're all multiplications or subdivisions of the thing, and you can analyze somebody's grooves, which maybe the computer software will do for you, and it's probably a little bit beyond me, but it's mathematics. I remember doing something with the Rich Kids. Mick Ronson was producing, and it was a bit high for the backing vocals. And Mick Ronson said, "Well, let's slow the tape down to do it, so it's a bit lower." And I said, "Yeah, but when you speed it back up, it'll be out of tune." He said, "No, no, no, no." And this was like when people play darts and they just count off in their head, the 320s are 180, no, 360s are 180, and it's like that. He was like that. He said, "No, if you speed up, if we slowed it down half, it would be half an octave. So if it was A 440, half speed would be 220 the speed, but then you speed up just a fifth, and that'll put a third above the octave of the river. And he was like that with it, and it was all maths, you know, and it's just something you kind of know. So maths is all that. And and now I'm older, I do kind of read up on string theory and the beginner's guide to string theory. Yeah, Dummy's Guide to String Theory, and you kind of understand it when you read. And I'm talking about sort of quantum mechanics and things like that. I find them interesting. How that fits in with your life, I don't know. But it's better to know a little bit about something than nothing whatsoever.
One thing that was like a significant event of everyone of our generation, I think, anyone that I know, was when Bowie was on Top of the Pops and Starman. And you
Yeah,
mentioned
but
Mick
hang
Ronson.
on a second. Everybody says that, but I put money on it when he was first on the telly doing it. It wasn't Top of the Pops. It was Lift Off with Aisha on ITV. I'm sure that's where I saw him. Maybe the week before he did Lift Off with he did Top of the Pops, and he looked a bit kind of quite overly androgynous and stuff. And I know about Lift Off with Aisha because she was pretty fit, and then she ended up marrying Roy Wood from The Moon. So he wasn't doing so bad for a Brummie.
I mean, I remember he was actually the old grey whistle test, wasn't he, when man landed on the moon in '69? But he was obviously had a completely different image and style then. But
okay, but when you go back to that, I didn't say that because we didn't have a telly that got BBC Two back then, right? And I do remember when colour TV came out, and it was going to start at like kind of 8:30 on a Saturday night. We all sat around to watch it, and it was still black and white. And then it dawned on us all you had to have a colour TV. You don't know till you know.
The outsider plays an enormous role in pop music, and everyone, I think, who sort of gets into being a musician and does stuff is driven by this idea of being an outsider, and you discover that everyone feels like an outsider.
Well, yeah, but some more than others, and where there are honestly a little bit more. I mean, another thing with, when I was working at Malcolm's and Vivienne shop, where I met Steve and Paul, it seems, kind of thinking about it now, it was probably populated by all people coming who were all outsiders, And Malcolm and Vivienne were kind of a lot hipper than I was. They'd been around a bit, 10 years older, but even before the Pistols, I'd be going to the Sombrero in Kensington 9th Street, in 1975 or somewhere, as a bloke they only let Vivienne and Jordan in. There was no other women there, and you'd be in a circle, dance and hustle to George McRae. I've seen that other side of kind of life, and it's a bit of a Devon, and it's kind of interesting, and lots of fashion trends and musical trends come out of that side of life.
How did you, when you first worked with Malcolm at the shop, did you feel part of it? What I just wondered why, because it sort of seems you weren't in the same mold as some of the other people that were going there, or some of the other people that
No, but I think I was young, I was still at school. I was 16. I was a Saturday lad. It was no big deal, but I kind of everybody had wore great coat flares and had long lank hair, and I didn't, so that was a start. I kind of fitted in enough and kind of grew into being a bit more hip, but but the place was pretty hip as well as going to the Sombrero and stuff. Back then, people would come in the shop, and it would be like Richard O'Brien, who had the Rocky Horror Show on when it was still a play in the King's Road Theatre and Little Nell, and there was all these sort of odd people that you're like, oh, they're quite interesting. Oh, they're quite interesting. There was quite a heavy gay clientele as well, even before people were called gay, really, back then. There was a guy, Timmy, used to come in. He was always, he was screaming, right, and didn't mind anybody saying that. And he got nicked for improtruding and ended up in one of the scrubs, serving the lesson. And I said, wasn't that a bit heavy in there? Thinking, if you want to treat somebody less than it, maybe not best to put them in a men's prison. He went, oh no, I loved it. He said, anyway, I've got a new job. I said, oh, and I'm taking orders. Does anybody want anything? And I said, where are you working? He said, self-reviews, right? And before I worked at Malcolm's, I worked at Whiteley's department store. So I thought, oh, he's working at the department store. I said, oh, what department are you working in? He went, oh, they moved me around. And he was going in shoplifting to order them. There was all this stuff going on, right? Whether it was big or clever or right or wrong, I don't know. But, I was observing it all. And
So-
it was never the bank clerk who was doing that. It was somebody who was kind of hit to a different world. So I think I've done well to kind of be quite feet on the ground, and I'm proud of it,
Just time for me to ask you to take out a membership of this channel. At the price of a coffee each month, it allows you to see the new interviews earlier than non-members. Okay, I don't want to talk too long. Let's get back to this fascinating interview with Glen Matlock.
There was a fantastic place called the Coup Club. We went to in Praed Street in Paddington, about Malcolm and Vivienne, and they had like a disco, and it was all sort of Trinidad calypso kind of stuff like that. And there was another place we went to, the Last Resort, where Biddy and Eve would do a floor show. Biddy, I'm still mates with Eve Ferret down at Chelsea Arts Club, but Biddy would come on, and he was a bit of a Bowie boy kind of thing, let's say, and he had this fantastic hat, which was like a pillbox hat with a desert island on the top, with a palm tree and a helicopter going around. And when I saw it, after they'd done their turn, I realised he had one of those 50s kind of tin desert islands with a clockwork, but he'd made it into a pillbox hat. It's just daft stuff, really.
How did Malcolm get to be the manager? Because he wasn't really interested from your book at the start, was he?
No, but the funny thing happened. One of the other bands I liked to, as well as the Faces, was a band called the Sensational Alex Harvey Band, and I'd started working there full time a bit later on, and it was getting on for winter, and it was dark at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And Alex Harvey and Chris Glenn and Zal Clemenson came in, and it was cold, so they had overcoats on, and I was serving them. Quite pleased that a band that I used to follow around, who were beginning to climb up the greasy pole of the music business, were in there, and I was serving them. And then all of a sudden the door burst open. Malcolm came in with a delivery of boxes, looked aghast at these people, and he said, Glenn, out the back. And I said, what? He said, who's these people? I said, they're a band, the Sensational Alex Harvey Band. He said, no, they're not. He said, get them out. I said, Malcolm, they're a band. I've been to see them. He said, no, they're not. You've got to get them out. I said, well, who do you think they are then? He said, they're tax collectors. Right now, in fairness to Malcolm, because it's winter and they had overcoats on, Alex Harvey wasn't that tall, where he had a pair of National Service specs on, and the other guys were a bit bigger, and they could have been construed as his henchmen, his heavies. Anyway, I said to him, look, go and have a pint or a coffee or something. My mate will be gone and I'll serve it, which they didn't come back. But a few weeks later, they had a big hit with Delilah, the Tom Jones song. And then maybe a few weeks after that, they were doing Hampton Odeon. So I took my mate from art college, Nick Cash, who ended up in Scritty Pillity, Bernard Rhodes, who ended up managing The Clash, who was mates with Malcolm, and Malcolm to the Hammersmith Odeon to prove to Malcolm that they weren't tax collectors, and then they did a few Coasters numbers. They did Framed, it was a big war and all that. So he kind of liked it. He only liked old 50s music at the time and a bit of light jazz. And we sat there watching, and he looked at me and he said, how much was it to get in? I can't remember. Maybe it was 75 pence or something. And he went, how many is this place hold? And I looked round, I don't know, 2,500, 3,000, maybe a bit more. And he went, let's have a meeting about the band tomorrow morning. And so as soon as he could sniff a few bob, that's when he took us seriously for the first time.
Was it all about money with Malcolm, or did he really have some sort of anarchistic tendencies?
No, he wanted to be involved with something to make life a bit more interesting and stir things up a bit in some way. I wouldn't say he was particularly political and vote Labour or vote Tory or be a social democrat. He doesn't want, so certainly wasn't like that. He saw himself, and he always said to us that we were on the periphery by doing what we was doing. I just think he wanted to, he'd had. I remember we did a gig in Paris. It's quite famous. It's the French version of us playing at the Under Club when everybody saw us. It's a place called Le Bois Vincent, a place called Chalet du Lac. And for some reason, we got involved with playing there. And it transpires, it was the opening night. It was this old kind of 1890 cafeteria by this lake in a park in Paris. But inside it looked really space age. And I since found out that we played at the opening night for the new design of this up and coming at the time designer, Philip Stark, right? It was the big opening for this thing. And we kind of got it for this other guy, who was a mate to Malcolm, and I met back then. In fact, I'm going to go to do he's got one in London tonight. It's Jean-Charles Le Duc de Castelbarjac, who was also a fashion designer. Anyway, where am I going with this? And we went over there. So while we're there, we was there over the course of the weekend. Malcolm took us on a kind of like a historical walk where he used to hang out when he'd been in Paris, round by Odeon and the Sorbonne and stuff like that. And as he was walking past this wall, I said to Malcolm, I said, oh, look, this is before we played. I said, oh, look, we're going to go down well. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, look, they know the words to our songs. And he said, what do you mean? And on the wall was sort of repeated, Vive l'Anarchy, right? Anarchy. And he looked at him and he went, oh, as though we were the first people to think. It was funny.
I mean, he always presented himself as the guru, as the mastermind. What was the truth?
Kind of was in a little bit, but, I always say that I don't think it would have happened if everybody hadn't played their part, with the look, the artwork, Jamie Reed, Malcolm stuff, the attitude, Steve Jones, the guitar sound, Stephen Paul, John's fantastic delivery, and a big hand in the writing the songs, bloke about my size. It's all in there. Malcolm, I was talking to Julian Temple about this. When they made that Rock and Roll Swindle movie, he said to Malcolm, why don't you pretend that it was all your idea? It was a bit of a joke. And Malcolm, then he got the idea and run with it and kind of started to believe it, in a bit of a Donald Trump kind of fashion, which annoyed us really, We wouldn't have formed without his assistance. But I always say nobody would have heard of the Pistols without Malcolm. But I don't think people would have heard of Malcolm if it weren't for the Pistols. It was a very symbiotic relationship.
Is it true that he got Herbie Flowers into listen to you play to see if you could be?
Yeah, what happened was this is even before John was in the band, and back then there was a pub we used to hang out at called the Roebuck. It's not there anymore. It became the Dome, and then it's something else. But we go in there and we'd have a drink afterward, and then we go and have a rehearsal. And Malcolm brought a few people down, and he asked this bloke what he thought of us. I said, this is after the event. And he said, oh, well, this bloke come down, he's a musician. He said, you're not very good, but you quite like the bass player, me. And I said, well, that's good. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, Herbie Flowers, that's my bass player. And he was like, how do you know who he is? And I said, oh, I might know a little bit more than he suspect me, But it was just people who were on the scene a little bit, really. But it was funny, that pub. It was like something out of Budgie, all the characters in there. And he used to say to some older bloke who's at the bar before he went to try and get pills and a beer, So I said, what do you do? And they go, they go, well, I'm a diamond dealer, aren't I? And well, you might appreciate this, but you go in there and there was always a guy serving behind the bar, and he had a very kind of Quentin Crisp kind of little perm. And the guy leaning at the bar on the customer side would always be kind of gazing eyes at him quite strongly because it was his boyfriend, and it was Carlos the chef from Crossroads. It was all kinds of stuff going on. It was funny.
You were in the band, but there wasn't a singer. So do you remember your first time you met
Well, there
John?
was always a singer, but it was Steve.
Yeah.
And Steve thought he was a cross between Tom Jones and Steve Ellis, who was always in the Robot. It was but that wasn't quite what we was looking for. And then we was on the lookout for a singer. We had another guitarist at the time, Wally. It wasn't cutting it. Steve got better on the guitar. And we was looking for a singer. And we tried a few people out. And as I said before, everybody had long hair and flares and a greatcoat in the winter. So it was quite easy to whittle down a few people who had short hair and drainpipe trousers because there was hardly any in London at the time. And we tried a couple of people out, not so much about, and then John walked into the shop, and that was history, really.
John always wanted Sid in the band, didn't he?
He always wanted Sid in the band, which is a bit of a bone of contention, and that's what he got. But then, that's kind of what we fell out about, really. But I think I've had the last laugh now, because who's in the band and who isn't? Me, not John. Funny old life, isn't it? Yeah.
There's one thing that I read, and I can see it behind you because it's that Tony Hancock's The Rebel, the poster you got behind you.
And it's an original one as well.
Oh, wow. And the film is about a guy who gives up his day job to become an artist. And he's got a lot of enthusiasm, little talent, and critics dislike his work. But he impresses as an artist. So who is it about?
Well, who's the Rebel?
Does it relate to anyone you know? I mean, is it just a film that you really like?
No, I like it. I'm a big Tony Hancock and Gordon and Simpson fan. I think it's of its period. I think it's the most savage indictment of the art world ever. It's funny, but it's an everyman kind of thing. It starts off, he's working in, it's probably a scene they've copied from Metropolis or something like that. There's in the days before computers, they're all like in rows doing this tedious manual office work, if that's the sense. And he wants to break free, as Freddie Mercury would say. And he gives it a go, but kind of comes a bit unstuck.
Tell me about the songs that you contributed, because the major songs really came from you, didn't they?
I think I instigated them. Pretty Vacant's my song, and it was one of the first songs we ever wrote. So maybe sometimes I've been accused of being not so out there, but if one of the first songs you ever it's called is Pretty Vacant, and it's not Let's Dance on a Saturday Night, Darling, again, I think that's a bit of a feather in my cap. John was obviously the singer. The singer's supposed to come up with the words, so you got to step back a little bit and let him get on with his thing. But the first three singles, I think I had a big hand in. The whole musical chord sequence for Anarchy in the UK is mine, interpreted very well by Steve. And God Save the Queen, a similar kind of thing.
But Pretty Vacant.
And other stuff on the album, but I think, the main first three singles are from a bloke about my size. But I've never claimed to do it all, but I did more than my bit,
So Pretty Vacant was inspired from Richard Hell's Blank Generation, I read.
Yeah, loosely, but it was also inspired by what was and wasn't going on in London at the time. Mid-70s London, there was power cuts, strikes, rubbish polo in the streets, IRA bombings, and there was an air of sort of despondency, really, which I think we all felt, but we was also, and this is cheap by jail and feeling that, and reading newspapers and it's all doom and gloom. We was also young men trying to find our way in the world, wanted to do something positive. Now, musically, we didn't know what we wanted to sound like. We just knew what we didn't want to sound like, but it was going to do something anyway. And it came out like that, really. We obviously had our influences, both collectively and individually. We liked the Spiders from Mars and the Velvet Underground and Iggy and the Stooges and New York Dolls, and then Paul and Steve like early Roxy music, and I didn't mind that. And I liked Tamla Motown and the early Kinks and the Small Faces. I kind of liked ABBA, who just come through then. John hated most of that, and he liked Van de Graaff Generator and Can, but I like Can a little bit too, and Captain Beef, and it's all in there. They're very simple songs, but there's a lot. When you make, say, like French bouillabaisse, it's fish soup. You don't put one fish in there. There's about 10 different species of fish, and well, probably what was on at the market that day in Saint Tropez or wherever you, and loads of herbs and things. And it's still fish soup, but it's got lots of ingredients that makes it taste like a very thick, rich. And I think the Sex Pistols can be kind of akin to a musical bouillabaisse.
I mean, you mentioned ABBA, and SOS features in the influence because of the guitar.
Yeah, it's only because I shot my big mouth off, and I wish I never did. But there's a little bit in one of their songs that sounds a very tiny little bit about like the riff to Pretty Vacant, and the riff's not in the song, but by hearing what the bass player did, it kind of suggested the idea to me. Yeah. So hang on, I've got to get rid of something. Yeah. So there you go. But I always liked that. But when they came through, I just, I've never been to see Mamma Mia or gone to their museum, even though I've been in Stockholm. I might do one day, or the ABBA Live or whatever it's called. But when their song comes on the radio, they're so well crafted. I think their command of English for Scandinavians is fantastic. Even a song like "Knowing Me, Knowing You," it's kind of it's clever for an English person to come up with. And there's a great song, "The Day Before You Came," where it's like a big European, a bit different, really.
You mentioned about the 70s being a bit shit. I mean, they were very shit, wasn't they? So, but
in terms of, there was a lot of stuff that came through in certain periods. Maybe a bit earlier on, which then had kind of petered out a little bit. A lot of what happens in England, good stuff comes through, and then they have some success, and they fuck off to America, and then there's a hole. So I think we came through on the hole where the Faces and Mock the Hoople and Bowie were trying to break America, and they weren't around so much, and a little bit.
Well, what I meant was society was it was a really difficult time in terms of society. And you mentioned, I think you sort of hinted at there's a generational split, or there felt like a generational split in that era, where there were two different generations, and somehow the Sex Pistols sort of pierced that open completely and flipped it on its head. Do you think that, in a sense, what played into your success was also it could never happen in another era? It could only happen in that era.
It was so much happenstance in the Pistols, though. I mean, we was a product of our time. We was a product of the people that we met. Everybody always says, "Can there be another punk rock?" Well, I hope not. Not because I want to protect it for myself and my kind of acolytes and stuff, but it was quite organic. Everybody came together for the same reason. Everybody was looking for something. When we started playing out and stuck our heads above the parapet, everybody was looking for change. And I don't think people knew what they were looking for. But it's like, if you go and, I always say this, but if you go shopping and you want to buy a pair of trousers, you don't necessarily know which ones you want until you see them, and it's kind of like that, really.
When you were on the Bill Grundy show,
yeah,
and the absolute, the fury and the filth, and it just exploded and just went completely nuts afterwards. Did you feel like you were enemy number one as a band?
Not at the time. The next day we did, when we got that to go to Manchester Square, we just signed to EMI, and to get in, there was a kind of a gauntlet of press people when they still had trilby hats with press in there. It's like, oh, I think something's up,
But they also, all your gigs got cancelled, didn't they, for a while? Isn't that also what happened?
Yeah, we kind of like did 3 or 4 gigs out of 23. because they tried to censor us. And we was on this coach going around England, turning up at shows, hoping to play, even if we knew there wasn't much chance, we'd still go. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got the fee or the guarantee or what have you. But we had to show that we wasn't, um, we wasn't going to kowtow to anybody. I was up for that. It was fine, but because it was kind of quite frustrating, bit boring really, and being cooped up together, it didn't really help everybody's sort of social interaction really, and that's when things started coming ahead with me and John. Really, it became quite factional, and because of that, I was hanging out with Mick Jones from the Clash. He was on the tour, and then John thought I was consulting with the Enemy, even though we'd invited him to be on the tour. And there's Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers all shooting up in the Dragonor and Leeds, and they're trying to nick me as a bass player. And I thought, well, I don't want to go. There was all stuff going on, there's stuff going on with like me, and then Paul and Steve were mates with Paul Simonon because he's that kind of good-looking bass player kind of bloke, and we'd share Paul. It was stuff.
I mentioned that sentence at the beginning about carrying the childhood, and John carried his, which was a very difficult childhood. And to be fair to him, pubs in the 70s, which was the name of his book, had, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs on the door.
No blacks, no dogs, no Irish, in that order. Yeah, it must get you. I can't dispute that, And I've always said this is, one of the songs that we was working on, and they didn't think they'd made it, and they'd screw up, and you go, I wonder what he wrote, and you have a look. And one of them had the line in it, waiting for the Archangel Gabriel, or Gabriel, or whatever you pronounce it. It's a bit weird, and then he's got, I am an Antichrist. If you was brought up a good C of E boy, not, well, it's a joke, isn't it? Are you Jewish? No. Are you Muslim? No. Are you Catholic? No. Or you must be C of E. I was on, I must be C of E. But somebody must be C of E at Church of England, for your listenership who don't know what it is. I just wouldn't even consider about thinking about the Archangel Gabriel or being an Antichrist. It doesn't come into your perception. So obviously it's something to do with John's, I'm not saying he's a fucked up Catholic, but he must have had some kind of dealings with it for that to kind of sink in somehow. And he's even admitted it. He said, oh, well, maybe I am,
I mean, you said that he's not in the band now, and you are, to that extent. I mean, the other thing is,
but I'm kind of sad about that. But I think he's been the master of his own destiny, really. And I think he's painted himself into a corner.
You've had a pretty stellar career. Not only, I mean, you left the
it's been pretty up and down.
Yeah, it's been up and down. But I mean, you were 20 when you left the Sex Pistols. I mean, so people haven't started anything at 20. Do you know what I mean? And there you are at 20, out of a band that's massive. You then form the Rich Kids, and the Rich Kids, they seem to have garnered more credibility over the years than they sort of got success at that period.
Yeah, although we've had our moment in the sun for a little bit, yeah, well, you're right. I think we was a little bit ahead of our time. I think it was a bridgehead between punk, and I remember playing in Birmingham at Barbarella's, it being rammed, and in the front row were like the fledgling Duran Duran, and I'm mates with Gary Camp, who said he used to come and see the Rich Kids play at the Nashville or somewhere like that, and so, in fact, he played with us, and do you know what he said to me when we was rehearsing? Because poor old Steve New passed away, and he stood in for a one-off gig we did. He said, you know what, Glenn? He said, me doing this must have been what it was like for you when you was playing with the Faces, because I did some stuff with the Faces in later years. My neighbour's a bit noisy. I'm just going to shut the door. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Yeah, and to me, music is like, the Pistols were supposed to be like a sea change, I don't believe that. I think it's a batting race. We took stuff from people before us, and then people that came after, you sort of pass the baton on to them a bit. What they do with it is up to them. Some do all right, some don't. But it has also opened the door for me. I've been invited to play with people both before us, like Iggy Pop and the Faces and some other things, and then people who came just after us. You know, every now and then, Zach Starkey calls me up to do a session or whatever. You know, and the Primal Scream guys once in a blue moon, I'll do something with them. So we kind of bridged that whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's fascinating about your book is that the connections in terms of who influenced you and who were you into when you were young, then you working with them later, and also, you know, you just mentioned Bobby Gillespie, and then sort of, in a sense, the other side of it as well. So it covers the whole sort of.
I suppose I'm that kind of guy, but I'm not the only person like that. I mean, I used to like reading, you know, the sleeve notes on albums when an album was an album, and the sleeve notes were. And there was all these people who popped up all the time, you know, Jim Keltner and Bobby Keys, and he'd be playing with somebody, and then he'd be playing with somebody else, and that always kind of sort of fascinated me a little bit. And I'm mates with Clem Burke. You asked me to do the Blondie thing when they were stuck, and we chat, and always isn't it good to be known to be, you know, one of the top punks and stuff. But yeah, but I only ever really wanted to be a working musician, and we have been, you know. So that's kind of.
And talking of that, I mean, you're going on tour again, and I presume in support of the latest album, which came out
Kind
last
of,
year.
yeah. With the latest album, I wanted to do a whole bunch more gigs than I did get to do, but because I've been so busy. You know, Blondie called me up, and that's kind of quite a big deal thing, and other things that have stopped me being able to book something. And we did a tour opening up for Stuff Little Fingers around the country in March, I think it was, which went well. And I haven't really done any gigs of my stuff since then because I've been touring with Blondie, Pistols, other things. Yeah. Although I did some shows in California with Clem. So, you know, you can't. Big gigs is one thing because there's enough money to go around. Smaller club shows, I'd love to be able to take my guys to America, but you just can't afford to do it. But Clem volunteered, and he helped me put a band together with a guy called Steve Fishman and Gilby Clarke from Guns N' Roses, and we did shows there. So you just have to be a little bit malleable, kind of thing. But I'm happy, privileged, kind of feathering my cap that people of that caliber will come and do a little show with me for not much more than a drink, you know. But we have a laugh, and I think there's a bit of a little bit of cachet that rubs off with playing somebody like me from back then for them. So, yeah.
How did you deal with Danny Boyle's version of the Pistols?
I wasn't very happy about that. I told Steve, he said, "What do you think?" I said, "You got a shocking memory, mate." Right? Danny Boyle, I had a series of meetings with and told him my side of things. And then when I had a private screen to see it, he kind of ignored me. So I met him in LA. There was some red carpet thing that I tagged along to just kind of be matey with Steve. I wasn't happy about it. And Danny Boyle came up to me, "Oh, hi, Glenn." And he knows full well that I think he's a. So I don't know if you can broadcast that, but he ignored me, you know. And I think what could have been really good is a bit naff. And I bumped into Paul Weller, who lives around the corner from me. We use the same coffee shop. And he said, "You seen that?" And I said, "Well, I have." He said, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, have you seen that? What do you think?" And he went, "Well, kind of rock follies, isn't it, really?" And that's what I thought about it, you know.
That is a brilliant description of it.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about
Sums the whole thing up in 2 words, you know.
Oh, that's brilliant. How do you feel of being you know, you were part of a band that this may be inflated, but I think it did. I mean, it really did change the world of music at that period. and it was a band that influenced so many acts that were to come up. You know, the Manchester gig that every band either went to or pretends they went to. Do you know what I mean? It was one of those. You were in one of those bands that changed music and I think, changed a whole generation. When you look back, how do you feel about being part of that today? Is it just something that happened, or do you feel
It's
pride?
something that happened. That's the way it is. I can't change it that much. I don't look back if I can help it. I mean, the only thing is, all my life, no matter what I've tried to do, I have to do interviews like this. And I'm quite happily talking to you, but people always ask me, and I have to think about it. But if I didn't ask me, I wouldn't really think about it that much. I like to live in the present, doff my cap to the past, and look to the future. That's where I'm at, really. And if you're a songwriter, which I see myself or aspire to be above anything else, I think the thing that interests you most is the next song you're just about to write, really.
Yeah, and also, I mean, Consequences Coming is when we look back at you, like watching or listening to the Kinks, I should say, of Dead End Street back then as a child. It's sort of the fulfillment of what they were doing back then is what you're doing today with your social commentary and your music.
Yeah, I mean, I don't claim to be Engels or Tariq Ali or somebody like that, but there's been so much going on in recent years that I think it's an abrogation of responsibility if you don't say your tuppence worth about it. And also, I think you got a responsibility to kind of just try in a small way to try and change the conversation a little bit. I think there's lots of, I mean, there you are sitting there in Athens. Good for you. Kind of wish I was. In fact, I nearly booked a flight to come to Athens for tomorrow. I haven't done it yet. Still might. But where am I going? The whole Brexit thing is such a complete nonsense. And I mean, the best thing that ever happened in my life was freedom of movement. And the possibilities that kind of brought for British people and for people coming over here. And if I'd never had it, I would never have missed it. But now it's been missed. Now it's been taken away. It's like a punch to the solar plexus, really. And I know there's kind of ways around it, but it's just not easy. And some urban in Liverpool got nothing going for him apart from manual labour where he's like, could get on an EasyJet flight, go to Ibiza, get a job in a bar, hang out, meet a couple of people who might be a bit posh or something like that. Oh, let's start your own bar, and then within 5 years, they got some little kind of dance music empire or something like that. They can't do that anymore. It's been taken away and it's wrong. And for what? For no real reason that I can see other than to help get Boris Johnson elected.
Yeah, and I think you said it earlier with Rod Stewart. He toured around Europe, came back, went home and said, I'm still broke, but I'm a changed person. And this is the point, isn't it? It's like that it was the easy opportunity to go and travel, and certainly for musicians to go and busk all around Europe. And I don't know how they do that now.
Well, I mean, maybe when Rod Stewart first did it, you could do that then in a different kind of way. That was before the EU put stipulations on which we helped kind of connive, and then we said we couldn't. I don't know, and there's the whole immigration issue, and obviously movement is a free thing, but now I think possibly, and I don't want to be too. When there was immigration from Europe and even Eastern Europe, they were kind of more like-minded than the people who were getting out, right? And you had more of affinity for them, and it's not even the colour of their skin; it's just their sort of morals and social interactions with people. And we're in a strange times, I think,
If you do come to Greece tomorrow, give us a ring. I'll show you a bit of Athens.
I'll meet you in the biscuit aisle of Marks and Spencer.
Yes, here with the view of the Acropolis that no other M&S has got. So brilliant. Listen, Glen Matlock, it's been brilliant to talk to you. I want to thank you at the end for your contribution to the culture because, I mean, we don't often get the chance to say thanks. And I think it's really important because what you've contributed has contributed to my life culturally. So I thank you from the bottom of my
bless you,
heart.
my gold. Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate you saying that. That's good. But I haven't finished yet. It
No,
might take me a little bit longer to get out the tour bus. But I haven't finished yet. So there you go.
up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews. And here is where you can connect.